to RPG Book Club, the podcast where we play a little bit of a video game and talk about how it makes us feel. I am Sam Allman.
I'm David Bernard Hauk.
I'm Maddie Grace Webbin.
And I promised it, and we did it. We're joined by the one, the only, the great, the Game Professor.
Hey, that's me. Hi, everyone.
AKA also Sam.
Also
yes,
Sam.
that is. Yeah, I am also Sam. So
Yes.
back to making this confusing.
Absolutely.
No, it's easy. You just gotta think about our tone. If I'm like, Sam, I'm talking about the Game Professor. If I'm like, Sam, I'm talking.
Today we'll be discussing the one, the only, the great Final Fantasy VII, the world's first ever JRPG. They did so good on the first try. There were no video games, much less JRPGs, before Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, it was actually the first video game of all time. It also was the first anime of all time.
Yeah. The portion we'll be covering is up until you leave the sewers, saving at the first spot in the train graveyard. So if you're not there, go and catch up, and then come back, because we're going to spoil the crap out of it.
Everything this week is total dog shit because the only good part of this entire game is the train graveyard. Just kidding, but it is a great message.
But before we get to all of that, a little update on our normal sellout game formula. So obviously we're playing the most sellout JRPG we could. This is just for the numbers. It happens to be a fantastic game, but we're doing this for the search engine optimization. But
we're doing it for the clout, and also because, Sam, you love elaborate bits.
I do.
And the idea of not playing any Square games for an entire year in order to build up just 2 years. In order to build up the throbbing sexual tension, the Square lust, only to unleash it all in a hot load of 1997, goodness is a smart idea.
Yeah. And
for what it's worth, I'm pretty sure that back when I joined all of you to talk about Lunar, I was like, if you ever do talk about Final Fantasy VII, do not do that without me. Bring me back, please. So,
nice. And here we are.
It's a shame. It's a shame that we couldn't have been here with Eli, but that's okay.
Yeah, the whole bit was to get Eli to finally play Final Fantasy VII. So I'll just keep hitting him up on Discord until he plays along.
Hey, what? Do I need to go beat him up or something?
No, he just hasn't ever played it. Before he joined the podcast, the last RPG that he had played was Final Fantasy VI. Like,
oh gosh,
when it came out. So
yeah, and then he did that thing that a lot of people do, where you don't play the really popular thing, kind of because you want to be a hater, and I don't mean that in a critical way. Everyone does that, right? It's like you never get around to it, but then eventually, never getting around to it becomes like a bit that you just keep doing for its own sake. So it was like, okay, but once we get to this game on the pod, you're going to have to play it. But he didn't make it that far, so sadly we weren't able to force him into it.
Oh, boy.
But Eli has now been replaced by Bernard, and because our last year of the podcast has been weird, to say the least, we played a long-ass duology of Persona 2 and a short-ass 5 hours of Crusader of Sinti. Best of the Rest doesn't really make sense for this year because, like, what, are you going to vote for Shin Megami Tensei 4 and then we're at it for another 20 weeks? Like, it's not happening. So instead, we're giving Bernard a chance to do his auto by RPGs. So throughout the entirety of Final Fantasy VII, instead of voting on the Best of the Rest from last year, you're going to get to vote for Bernard's auto by RPGs. For those keeping score at home that are making sure that I'm being fair and impartial for all video games to get a chance for Best of the Rest, the 2 normal-sized Best of the Rest contestants will be in next year's thing. They'll show up. You'll vote against 6.
Nice. Wait, so what are Bernard's auto RPGs? I mean, we already played Lost Odyssey and Persona 3, so what do we do? What's he doing?
Are we announcing it now?
Yeah.
All right. So the choices will be between Skies of Arcadia and Paper Mario.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, damn, those are some good choices. Both games that I have not finished, but both good games.
Funny enough, Skies of Arcadia I've never played more than a goddamn second of. Paper Mario, I did watch my girlfriend play almost the entirety of it in the last year. So we'll see if I actually played or not. Like, I wasn't playing it, but I was in the room for the majority of it being played. So
Right. That counts. That sort of counts.
I'll go back and forth on it.
Yeah, so if you want to vote on our next game, if you make any donations over there, and this first week of Final Fantasy VII is a fucking doozy. So we're not going to talk about our week. Like, there's so much plot right now that you could probably stretch this out to be like about a third of an entire other RPG if you wanted to. There's just so much happening this week. So
I mean, they did literally pretty much do that with the remake. So
yes, that sir was the joke. So
oh, well, not so smart for understanding it and explaining it. Then go me, I guess.
Yay. But yeah, so we're not going to talk about our week. We're instead going to listen to a tiny bit of Final Fantasy VII music so that we don't get sued, and then we'll talk about the history of Final Fantasy VII. So, the history of Final Fantasy VII. Where to fucking start? I think the only logical place to start is to ask, what is everyone else's relationship to Final Fantasy VII?
I can start. I think my story might be an interesting one to start with. It's a little bit interesting, but also pretty simple. So I was born in 1991. So like this game didn't actually come out that much longer after I was born, right? But I spent most of my life playing like older games. Long story short, I wasn't allowed to play JRPGs for a while because I don't know. I think it was a combination of my parents thought they were like satanic / also I didn't really get them enough to push it anyway. I think it was a little bit of both. It wasn't just my folks. But eventually I learned what a goddamn JRPG was. And I learned what emulation was because a lot of my discovering of classic games was via emulating things. And I basically emulated games when I was at the age that a lot of people would have been when they had originally played these games. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not the same generation as people who grew up playing FF4, but I did grow up playing FF4 because I emulated it instead at the same age. So anyway, I remember emulating FF1. I don't think I ever beat it. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It's not a good game. Who cares? And then I played FF2, and I think I got like halfway through it, but then I wanted to play a little bit of FF3 because I was curious about it, aka FF6, you know. And it was so incredible that I never beat FF2. I was just sucked in, right?
Sorry, when you say FF2, are you talking about 4 then?
Yeah, of course. I mean 2/4. So then I started playing 3/6. I guess I looked into it. So by the end of 6, I'm fully JRPG pilled, right? I'm like, oh my god, this is the greatest game genre. I'm 11 years old and it's blowing my goddamn mind. And I don't remember what other games I played, but I do know that I didn't have any Sony consoles. I had a PlayStation earlier in my life, but it had been sold by my older brother because he wanted an Xbox. So the point is, I didn't play these games. I just wanted to play them, right? But then one day I'm on some forum or website, and I see that Final Fantasy VII has a PC version. And dear listener, I don't think I've ever purchased an object that quickly after discovering that it exists. I immediately went to Amazon, made 3 button presses, and then Final Fantasy VII for the PC was on its way to my door. So that was the first version of the game I played. By that point, like, I mean, to be clear, this was like 2003 or something, right? Like FF10 was out, FF11 might have been out, but I couldn't play any of those games. So as soon as I found out that FF7 was out, I was just like, bam, hit the button. So that's my history of it. You know, the games are really popular, and I think that's a good way to look at it because it's like, man, the advance from 6 to 7 is really just crazy. Like, yeah, technologically, but playing the game this week made me realize, oh my god, the difference in pacing and writing is phenomenal. It's stupendous how it wasn't just that they learned new technology, it's that they completely like jiggered their approach to like writing and designing a game because of the opportunities afforded by new technology. And I'm honestly shocked at how not transitional it feels. Like it feels like it arrives like we're in the new dimension, man, and we are now having extremely long dialogue scenes with like no combat or dungeons or dialogue or anything in a way that feels so fucking modern. So yeah, that's the history. That's my history of the game, of the with the series, and also I think a little bit of my view of how the game stands in relation to its predecessors. Oh, also FYI, the PC version of the game is weird as shit. There's a lot of goofy things about it that I might say like at the very end of this if I feel like it.
I'm guessing since that was like in 2003, that was the IDOS version, not the .emu version, right? There's
yes, released by IDOS. Yeah, it was. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but it was sometime. It was sometime before Advent Children came out. I knew it was before Advent Children came out.
Cool. Who else wants to go?
Well, like many games, my experience with Final Fantasy VII is I played it at some point in the past and forgot most of the experience.
What a tragic thing for a game liker to have. Your existence is wild.
I liked it a lot, and replaying it this week, I like it a lot. I think I only ever played it through all the way the once.
I may have also only played it once. I know I've replayed it before, but I don't remember if I replays were replaying the entire game or just like, X amount of it, and then I fell off. I can't actually remember. I think I've played the entire thing twice at least, I think.
What about you, Sam?
I'm one of those basic people where this was my very first JRPG. So it's funny, I'm actually making a video soon to celebrate 50k subscribers specifically about games that like shaped my approach to thinking critically about video game storytelling and such. And this is absolutely one of them. I had played a few games with stories where the story had stood out to me. At the time, I was obsessing over like the sci-fi mystery of Halo and the well-structured character arc of Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time and such. But then to play this game, which at that point was old. I'd already played those games, so like by this point, I'd already seen much more impressive things than this.
Right,
but I specifically remember actually the thing that blew my mind was the water tower flashback. Like there was a point where I was in that scene and I was like, there's not even like a game, like this isn't leading into me doing anything. This is just here for the story. And I've never seen a game commit to that this much. And it just like absolutely blew my mind in terms of, just the ability for a game to focus this much on its storytelling. So it's a very, very influential and important game for me, for sure.
Yeah.
I love it a whole lot. And I have played it a few times. Yeah. Like I said, I'm going to be reacting to pretty much anytime we talk about music or anything a lot, because a lot of the aesthetic of this game is like etched onto my very soul. So
how long has it been since you played a game with a Nobuo Uematsu soundtrack?
Oh gosh, no, you did Lost Odyssey.
I know, but that was a fucking while ago, though.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said you hadn't. Okay,
no,
so yeah,
is that the last one we've done? Was Lost Odyssey?
Maybe.
I'm going to look through our list of episodes just to see, because boy, it's nice to have Nobuo, not just any Nobuo Uematsu, but one of his best works.
Absolutely one of his best. Yeah.
So I believe I've remembered something about my experience playing Final Fantasy VII. So I'm pretty sure I played it before there was a digital re-release of it. And it was, at that time, it was like hard to find, kind of expensive, because everybody wanted it, because it was the best game ever. But I managed to find a copy at GameStop, and I played it that way. The end.
Nice. I realized I could have played the game along with y'all. I might actually have a copy of the game. I don't know if you know this, but Square reprinted their PSX games all the way up until like late
year.
PS2 era or last year. Yeah. So like as late as literally last year, you go on Amazon, buy a fresh new copy of FF7, Vagrant Story, all these games. Like
Amazing.
in
I had
box.
no idea.
I didn't know it was
I don't
till
know
last
about
year,
Vagrant
but
Story, but Chrono Cross you can always get.
yeah, a lot of it. So it's really neat. So I may or may not have one. I said it at the end of our last season. I will say, for the first time ever in the history of the podcast, I will be abstaining from playing this entire game, which really sucks. It's the last game I would have wanted to do this with, but it's where I am. It was either that or don't do it at all for my life.
Yeah.
So, sadly, I will simply be watching a video of the game along with the rest of you, which is really a damn shame. But anyway, just FYI.
Yeah. So for me, I didn't get into JRPGs until like the 5th grade because the Sega Genesis and the Super NES and the Nintendo and the PlayStation all have 2 controller ports, and I have 2 older brothers. So I was a video game watcher for the majority of my life, and it wasn't until I bought my own PS2 that I started able to go back and play things. And so my friend lent me a copy of Legend of Dragoon, which was my first RPG.
That's why you're like this.
Yes. First is in quotes because I don't remember if I played Legend of Dragoon first or Paper Mario first or Shining Force first. I just remember that those were my first 3, and I really thought that active button presses in combat was going to be a lot bigger thing in RPGs than it turned out to be. And so I loved Legend of Dragoon. It was amazing. My friend was like, "Oh, that's nothing compared to Final Fantasy VII," and he lent me a copy of Final Fantasy VII, but I only played like an hour of it for some reason. I remember putting in Game Shark codes and getting infinite experience off of the first guy, so my cloud was level 999. The sort of shit you did because you were a dumb, stupid kid in the 5th grade, and I stopped playing it for whatever reason. So then, in middle school, I played Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy IX and some of Final Fantasy X. So now I was one of those hipsters that said Final Fantasy VII was too ugly to play, and I never went back to it. I tried it a couple of times via emulation, but emulation hasn't been great for the PS1 for the majority of the time this game has been out. So it was like low frame rate or weird and stretched or like flickery or whatever. And I hated it. And I've never actually played it until the Steam release that I played in like 2016 on the clock at Blizzard in a tiny like 240p window in the corner of my screen while I was doing my job. I don't work there anymore. They can't fire me. I can say it. I played all of Final Fantasy VII on the clock there, and I loved the shit out of it. I felt so bad that I had hated it for so long for the stupid memey reasons that all the characters look like Legos, and they don't actually, and it's actually fantastic, the character design and the 3D models of this game. But I loved all of it up until I got to disc 2, which we'll discuss when we get to disc 2. but
I do have an answer to the question. Our last Lost Odyssey episode was December 1st 2019, almost a full 3 years ago. However, we did play,
Was that after Chrono Cross? Because that's what I just remembered, and that has some tracks by...
Not Cross, but Trigger. Yeah, we did play Chrono Trigger, though, which has some tracks by Nobuo Uematsu, though not very many. So, technically, the last episode of the podcast featuring a game with any Nobuo Uematsu music would have been the final Chrono Trigger episode on June 2nd, 2020. So it's been either 3 years or 3.5 years. So anyway, it feels nice to say.
Thinking this is selling out when you did Chrono Trigger already, like, come on. But
yes,
but is bigger. But
that was part of a different complicated bit.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, that's fair.
So Chrono Cross uses the same. It's an arrangement of the overworld theme, but the overworld theme of Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross was written by Uematsu. So Chrono Cross would be the last time there's a song written by Uematsu, even though it was arranged by someone else for Chrono Cross.
Yeah.
So technicality, Chrono Cross.
No, that doesn't. That does not count. That is an arrangement. It is not even. It is a variation on a theme. It is whatever. It doesn't count.
I am curious. I'm sorry, this is off topic, but do we know exactly which Chrono Trigger songs were written by Uematsu?
I do know that the main themes, the just the basic version of it. I don't know if any modification, any variations on it are. I know that version was by him. If I went through the soundtrack, I could tell you because they very obviously sound like Nobuo Uematsu wrote them. But it's not a whole lot.
Okay, yeah, that's one of my favorite soundtracks, despite not being him, when most of my soundtracks from that era that I really love are by him. So
look, if they sound delicate and have kind of weird tonal ideas and go doodly doodly doodly, they're by Mitsuda. If they sound, if they're not like that, then they're by Uematsu.
So I get the impression most of my favorites probably, but all right.
So Final Fantasy VII is the 7th game in a long-running franchise. So it's crazy how my meme earlier about it being the first RPG is kind of true. Like, there were many RPGs before this, including Chrono Trigger, which we just talked about how it was huge and great and all of that. And a lot of the RPGs before 7 could maybe be construed as better than this one. Ranking art is a fool's errand, so I'm not going to do it. But like, there are a lot of good things. But Final Fantasy 7 changed RPGs so completely that every single game after it for decades seemingly tries to emulate it in some way, and they're all chasing the high of Final Fantasy VII. We've already covered 3 games on this podcast that were deliberately created in response to Final Fantasy VII. Septerra Core, Anachronox, and Xenogears. So
yeah.
I mean, Legend of Dragoon was an attempt to make a first-party Final Fantasy VII.
Legend of Dragoon.
So
Final Fantasy 13 was an attempt to recapture that Final Fantasy 7 magic.
Yeah. So
I'll drop here my real quick. Sam, I think what you're saying is very, very true, and I want to put it in a slightly different way because I say this often. Final Fantasy 7 is the point at which RP is the marked, I think, the end point of the slow transition the Final Fantasy series had been making of envisioning a JRPG that was not Dragon Quest.
Yeah.
Like six was a shift. 4 even was a shift. But Final Fantasy 7 is the I think almost the final arrival point, either 7 or 8, at which JRPGs have marked out a different type of game where you have this super linearity, super cutscene heavy characters with lots of dialogue. You know, your character isn't a self-insert. Right, this scenario, cinematic excitement, also very loosey-goosey as far as game design, frankly. FF7 marks the birth, I would very, very honestly, without any irony, say, of a new kind of JRPG that didn't exist before, or at least it took a few games to evolve.
Yeah, I had later in my notes that we said on Bernard Remembers. And Bernard said that Final Fantasy IV was the first modern Final Fantasy, but in the terms of like thinking like that, Final Fantasy IV would be like the Final Fantasy I of modern Final Fantasy, and Final Fantasy VII would be the Final Fantasy IV of modern Final Fantasy.
To say, but you're not wrong.
Oh my god!
That's really 4. Let's just say 4, 5, 6, and 7. I think were a lengthy transitional state.
Yeah, and
most RPGs nowadays that aren't Dragon Quest are not like this is what almost all RPGs now are nowadays, not Dragon Quest.
Yeah, so even if Final Fantasy VII wasn't as good and fantastic as it was, it would still be very important. It's the first Final Fantasy that's not on a Nintendo console. Famously, Nintendo stuck to carts for the N64. They weren't big enough for 30 plus hours of RPG with full motion videos and all of that stuff. So Square moved to the PlayStation. It was the first Final Fantasy in 3D. It was the first one to use pre-rendered backgrounds. It was the first one to have 16 audio channels available for its music. And it was the first one that our boy Yoshinori Kitase would have sole directing duties for. He was co-director of Final Fantasy VI, but he was the sole director here. And he went on to direct or produce basically everything up until Final Fantasy 15.
Yep. And very importantly, I will say it was the first one to get fucking huge in America.
Yes. It was also the first time that the character designs were done by Nomura rather than Amano. And they're his best. Like, they're very stated compared to his normal, like, super buckles and fur and zippers and stuff that he's known for, because they have to read at not only low poly, but also at low resolution. Like, the camera zooms out super far all the time, where the characters are barely 12 pixels tall on the PS1 release, and you can still tell who each character is, no problem. I
find it hilarious that Nomura did such a fantastic job of that, of making character designs which read in these little Lego models, whereas Amano gave not a single shit about having his character designs resemble anything that can be represented in pixels.
To paraphrase something that my girlfriend would say rather often, Yoshitaka Amano is a terrible character designer. Which, I mean, he's an incredible artist, but when you design characters, you are supposed to be designing the characters in a way that keeps like the medium in mind, right? No, he just made really, really beautiful and evocative concept art that someone else then had to put all the fucking hard work of actually making goddamn video game graphics. Whereas Nomura's characters here are like, no, these are character designs that are actually like functional for a video game.
Yeah.
And I say that with the most possible respect. In fact, him not giving a shit about video games because they're bad is the thing I respect most about him.
This game was also, for lack of a better term, Final Fantasy's first anime bullshit game. The previous 6 games are all sweeping epics, but like how Maddie said, they kind of were a little bit Dragon Questy, where you got a guy and a sword and a quest. And even Final Fantasy VI, that like gets pretty far away from that. It doesn't get far away from that in an anime sort of way, but 7 is completely anime all the time, and Final Fantasy would be anime forever after this.
I mean, they were clearly taking inspiration in the previous games from like Dragon Quest, Western fantasy, Western comics were clearly a big influence, and then like anime, but like explicitly Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, and that's it. Whereas this is like, oh, you're taking influence from Blade Runner and Akira.
Needless to say, this game sold like a motherfucker, and it's kept selling like a motherfucker ever since. You can currently get it for the PlayStation, the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation P, the PlayStation Vita, the PS4, the PS5, 2 separate PC ports, iOS, Android, Switch, and Xbox One, and that doesn't even take into account its 2 prequels, its sequel, its remake/sequel, its remake/remake of its 2 prequels, and also the anime or the film. So, Final Fantasy, for better or worse, is Final Fantasy VII, and JRPGs are Final Fantasies. So now let's listen to some more music, pray we don't get sued, and then dive into the plot.
We could just sing the music.
Okay, I'm done.
It was an impressive recreation of it, though. Good job.
We put the disc in the PlayStation 1. We press power.
You fucking idiot.
The prelude plays, and we see the opening credits. Then we see a sword. Continue and new game. We have to wait for continue to load, and it takes a long time before we can click new game. We
It's a
click
weird
new
title
game.
screen, actually.
I love
Very
it.
minimalistic. It's
Doesn't
amazing.
even say the name of the game, though. Like, it's
Yep.
extra minimalistic.
We see the cosmos. We see it for a long time. Eventually, the sea of stars fades away, and we see a young woman bathed in green light leaking from some pipes in an alley. She picks up a basket of flowers and walks out onto the street. We pull back to see the enormity of the cyberpunk metropolis of Midgar, the most amazing thing you've ever seen at this point in 1997. We see the title, Final Fantasy VII. A cool train pulls into a station. Some people leap off the train and take out the guards there. One, who is clearly the leader because he's the largest, orders a newcomer to follow him. The newcomer fights his way through some guards and finds the other members of the group trying to get past a gate. One of them, Biggs, is impressed by the newcomer's fighting skill and says it's hard to believe someone from Soldier has joined a group like Avalanche. Another member of Avalanche, Jesse, asks what someone from the enemy side is doing with them. Biggs says the newcomer quit Soldier and Shinra. Biggs asks for his name. The newcomer curtly introduces himself as Cloud, or whatever dumb shit y'all entered.
We're not. See, you're glad I'm not playing the game, because if I was playing in the game, you would not hear the word Cloud for the entirety of the game. You'd hear like Dr. Pepper or something like that.
I would just consider naming all the characters by just taking a letter out of their name. So Cloud was going to be Claude. And then who knows after that, but I couldn't do it because I love this game too damn much.
I am unabashedly naming everyone after Dragon Ball character based solely on how they look and not the relationship to each other. So Trunks has been dating Bulma for a good portion of our week this week, which is weird.
That's not good.
That's illegal.
Cloud cuts the introduction short and says he doesn't care about these people's names. Once this job's over, he's out of here. The leader runs up and tells the team not to move as a group and that they'll meet at the bridge in front of Mako Reactor 1. Jesse gets the gate open and the team heads through. The leader tells Cloud he doesn't trust him, but does do the courtesy of showing his name entry screen, where we enter the name Barrett, as well as explaining the movement controls before running off. Or Hercule, yes. The camera zooms in behind Cloud, then tilts up to reveal the full height of Mako Reactor 1. The heads of the children in 1997 have exploded by this point.
Yeah,
I do want to point out that the game does a really cool technique here that I've actually never read about how it works. So ever since I was a kid, I had an idea of how it works. The game can seamlessly transition from gameplay into FMVs, but when you're playing the game, okay, if y'all don't know, if you're kids out there, there's a thing called a pre-rendered background. It's not like old games where the backgrounds are made with repeating tiles that are painted repeatedly to construct a level, but it's not like modern games where it's actually 3D. It's instead, you're basically running over a giant picture. And that picture could be a painting. A good recent example is the game Disco Elysium. That game's entire world it's a painting. Someone made a large, very, very, very detailed painting that is two-dimensional fundamentally, though of course, being that it's art, it uses perspective to have the illusion of 3D, and you run your 3D guy around on top of this painting. But it can also not be a painting. It can be generated in 3D using 3D modeling techniques, but then rendered and frozen. So what you're looking at is essentially a still image of a 3D model that somebody made in a computer and then took a screenshot of, basically, right? But it can seamlessly go into FMV. But you're like, wait, how can it change camera angles when this game, it's not actually having 3D models in the graphics? The game not that advanced 3D modeled environments, right? I'm pretty sure it's like this. It's basically just like whatever fucking image file they use for viewing your backgrounds is the same image file that you use for, like, you might just say one frame of an FMV. So, you're on frame 1, and then they just say, okay, now we're going to hit play on the fucking pre-rendered video and advance through the rest of the frames, right? That's pretty much how it works. I've never actually read about how it works, but it's pretty obvious that that's the only way you could really...
Yeah.
That's really the only way you could do it. And FF7, FF8, and 9 also do this. Also, sometimes the backgrounds, they're not actually one frame. They're usually like 3 or 4 or 5 repeating frames that loop.
Yeah. Final Fantasy VIII does the crap out of the movable FMV background thing, which is super cool.
It's phenomenal. And it's especially cool when you can still move your guy on top of it.
Yeah.
That must have took some complex modeling of like what the invisible 3-dimensional plane is. That way your character can properly move on it with proper collision detection. I don't know. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's legitimately a very impressive thing, especially considering, like, when you're playing it now, like, as I've been replaying it, I've been using the Switch version, and it's in HD, so you can see there's this, like, moment where you move from a pre-rendered, from a video, basically, and it just switches over from one frame to another into the pre-rendered background itself that you can actually run Cloud around on and such. You can see that moment when it happens. But back when the game came out, like on CRT TVs or whatever, it was practically seamless. It was very difficult to actually notice that moment of transition back then. Like, just a truly impressive and genius way to combine FMVs and gameplay seamlessly like that. Mm-hmm. It's really impressive.
And the funny thing is, I think of it as such a basic technique that all 3 of these games use. But now that I think about it, I can't think of non-Square games on the PSX really doing it. I don't think it ever happens in Resident Evil, for example. Legend of Dragoon does, okay. I can't think of it happening, though, in, like, Resident Evil or even stuff like... Or okay, I can't think of any of those right now, but there's a lot. It was a very common thing in the era. I just can't think of any right now because I'm stupid.
While we're on the topic, so there are 3 different ways that they do camera moves in this game. So they do the one we just about it at length, where it's the real or the engine character model moving over an FMV background. Then you have on the farther end, you have the actual FMVs, the one we just saw of Aerith in the alleyway and everything. But then there's a middle one that I love, where it's FMVs, like using the in-game models instead of the high poly fancy models to give more of the this is a moment that we wanted to do something cool, but not a moment that we wanted to take you out of the action. So you're still going to see Lego Cloud do the thing, but now that we're in the future and we have AI upscaled all these things, we can tell that it's part of the FMV.
They're not in-game rendered Legos. They're FMV rendered Legos, which means they basically look the same, but like weirdly smoother.
Yeah.
The variety of graphical styles in this game is very odd.
It is a weird most of this game is very intentional and feels like they very much knew what the fuck they were doing, except for pretty much everything involving its graphics, which comes off as like impressionistic and like abstract and weird and artsy, but in a way that is very clearly not a product of them being experimental, but a product of them not knowing what the fuck they were doing.
I mean, honestly, it felt pretty consistent to me, like, in hindsight, because the same thing happened on the Super Nintendo games. When you were over in the overworld, you had a relatively simplified pixel version of your character just walking around versus the more detailed ones that you had when you were actually in
I guess that's
town or a dungeon or whatever. That could
it just feels a lot weirder in this game.
Yeah, the difference is certainly more pronounced, but it feels, to me at least, anchored enough in the history of how these games presented things that it doesn't really throw me off. The format still seems fairly normal.
That makes sense. Although there is a whole other issue that I actually have already put in my notes but didn't mention it, which is the game's insane inconsistency with regards to the scale of anything in this game's world.
That is true. Yes.
They're like
every single Cloud is laying on a bed. When Cloud walks into the elevator and has to reach up above his head to hit the button.
Or like the very second screen in the game where like you come out of what's clearly like the whole building you were just in, but it's like the size of like a normal looking build. It's like the game can't decide whether it's trying to do a realistic recreation of a world or whether it's still stuck in like SNES gaming flap abstractions, and it like wildly oscillates between the two.
My favorite is at the top of the church after getting
of course.
out
Yeah,
of there.
that's one of the all-time best.
I think there is legitimately like a perspective thing they were sort of trying to do with that. I can see how like their size at the top is maybe supposed to be something compared to the bottom, but you know, it just doesn't. It looks like a teeny tiny toy building that they're just sitting on. It's weird, very weird.
Okay, let's pick up the pace.
Sorry,
Yes, yeah. We had to discuss this idea at some point.
Cloud and the Avalanche crew make their way through the Mako reactor. On the way, Barrett explains to Cloud that the planet is full of Mako energy, and while people use it in their everyday lives, most don't know what it is. It's the lifeblood of the planet, and the Shinra Electric Power Company is draining it with their Mako reactors to fuel modern society. The planet's dying, Cloud, he says. Cloud is not interested, and just wants to get this job over with so he can get paid. On the way, Barrett joins the battle party, and in the higher polygon battle graphics, we can see that he has a gun for an arm. Which we probably already knew that because of video game magazines or the manual or whatever, but I like to imagine a kid who knew nothing going in being surprised by that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Cloud and Barrett get to the center of the reactor. Barrett tells Cloud to set the bomb. Something comes over Cloud, and a voice in his head tells him to wake up, and that this is more than a reactor. Cloud shakes it off and sets the bomb. An alarm sounds, and they're attacked by a giant scorpion robot. This being an active time battle Final Fantasy game, there are times when you have to not attack the first boss, or it'll counterattack. And this being Final Fantasy VII, there's a weird translation that makes it sound like you should attack during those times.
That's right. Oh yeah, point on translations. What translations are we playing?
I am playing the original ass PlayStation 1 version, emulated with some beautiful scan lines, and it's just the most beautiful game I've ever seen. And then when I write the notes, I'm going through a long play of the Be a Cause fan translation update.
Cool. Yeah, I am watching a video of the... So, for those of you who don't know, the original game had a really bad translation, which is weird because FF4 and 6 had really pretty damn good translations, and 8 had a great translation. But this game's production was weird in a lot of ways, and one of them was that the localization was done in a very haphazard way that resulted in it being shitty.
One dude, right? Or am I misremembering that? Was there like one guy who did most of it?
I'm pretty sure it was one guy with a very tight schedule.
Yeah,
people say that a lot on Wikipedia. I was looking earlier, and it said there was a people of like a group of 15. But
Gotcha.
Okay, that's more reasonable.
Well, regardless, it definitely was not the same as early. Yeah, it's an anomaly in the series. Yeah. And anyway, ever since then, they've never really done a retranslation. All modern versions are pretty much just the same as the original translation, but cleaned up. Like grammatical issues are fixed. Obviously, nonsensical shit is rewritten. It's a slight touch-up rewrite of the original, but basically the same. So a lot of the problems are still there, just being clunky, being uncharacterful, being just sort of sometimes just confusing. And that's literally been it. It's never gotten a new one for its entire life, except that there's this apparently really, really, really good fanlation that came out just in the last couple of years. So apparently me and Bernard are both kind of using it. What about the two of y'all?
I'm playing on the Switch, so, you know, basically just the original, except it doesn't say this guy R6, so...
Yeah. I'm playing it on the PS5, so the PS4 version, which is the version that the Switch is based on. So
cool. We wanted to make sure we had both because, you know, you might want to highlight a certain line of dialogue in your mem-moms, so it's good to get both versions covered. Cool. And I will say to anyone who hasn't played this game, don't let my dunking on the original translation dissuade you. You can totally play the original. It's fucking great. It's the version we all play. It's the version that got insanely famous.
I actually love an aspect of the original translation. It's weird and sort of off, and it feels Lynchian. It's sort of a found object art thing to it.
Yeah, it feels like the entire game, including not just its graphics, as we discussed earlier, but also translation. It feels like the whole thing is put through this filter of just like you can't totally understand what's happening in front of you. Also, a lot of the game itself, like, you fight a fucking hell house, right? Like, the game's got a lot of just weird shit in it. So by translating it badly, it's almost just like, well, I didn't understand this. But really, who can ever truly understand anything?
Anyway, Cloud and Barrett beat the boss and have just 10 minutes to escape. It's really easy, and they make it in half the time, even with a detour to help Jesse. The Avalanche gang makes their escape, and the bomb destroys the Mako reactor in a massive explosion. Barrett orders the gang to split up and rendezvous at the train station. The neighborhood near the reactor is in mild chaos. The young woman from the opening approaches Cloud and asks what happened. After a brief interaction in which Cloud may or may not buy a flower, Cloud continues on his way. He gets cornered by Shinra soldiers on a road over a railway, so he jumps onto a passing train like a badass. In a storage car in the train, the rest of the Avalanche gang wonders what happened to Cloud. Then the door slides open and Cloud flips inside and says a one-liner. Barrett is pissed off by Cloud's behavior and heads into the next car. The rest of the gang follows. Jesse calls Cloud over to the screen, which shows the train route on a wireframe map of Midgar. She explains the architecture. It's a circular city split into 8 triangular sectors. There's a metal plate about 50 meters above the ground, with pillars in each sector holding it up. She also explains that there's an ID scanning system on the train, so they have fake IDs to get past it. Barrett looks out the window and muses that they can see the surface now, but their city has no day or night. If the plate weren't there, they could see the sky. Barrett, prone to giving speeches, gives a speech about the inequality in Midgar. We learn that the rich live in the city on top of the plate, while the poor live in the slums under it. The slums are polluted and the ground is barren. Cloud asks why everyone doesn't just move up above. Barrett says it's because they don't have the money, or because they love their land, no matter how polluted it gets. The train arrives at the station in the Sector 7 slums. Barrett tells the gang to meet back at the hideout, and they make their way to the bar, 7th Heaven. Barrett clears out the bar so the gang can talk business. Cloud enters and is greeted by Tifa, his childhood friend, and her theme, which is the most beautiful song you've ever heard.
It's one of the best, slow, pretty songs Uematsu's ever written. This game is much more famous for Aerith's theme because of the way it's used so dramatically and in some very important, memorable parts in the game. But Tifa's theme is the better piece of music, and the piano version that they released in that piano collection around 2000 and circa 2003 or some shit, is just a jaw-droppingly beautiful piece of music. It fucking rules.
In general, this opening little while is a tour de force of excellent Final Fantasy music.
Yeah,
the Shinra theme is great. The opening theme for the cutscene, of course, is fantastic. You get the battle theme. And then you get that song, I think it's called Anxiety, on the way out, which is just one of the most, sort of hauntingly, sadly beautiful things I've ever heard in my life.
It's a really great track. I will say, this game is not actually unique in that its soundtrack is very front-loaded. Most JRPGs have front-loaded soundtracks because it makes sense. The farther you are into the game, games reuse music. So the farther you are into a game, the more you're hearing songs that you already heard earlier that are just being repeated. So, of course, at the beginning of the game, you're hearing a lot of these tracks for the first time, right? But if you look at this game's soundtrack, its OST is 3 discs, and literally the first disc is Midgar. So 1/3 of the game's music is songs either songs that appear for the first time in Midgar, or even sometimes songs that exclusively appear in Midgar and do not ever appear later, such as that track Anxiety. I do not think that track ever appears later, though maybe it does here and there, but most of the field tracks, when you're just running around, never appear again. So it's they really went all out on the Midgar section.
There's also a shy little girl named Marlene in the bar, who we find out is Barrett's daughter. Barrett is daddy, confirmed. Barrett and the Avalanche crew head down a secret elevator to their hideout. Tifa makes Cloud a drink and they talk for a bit. Then Cloud heads downstairs. Barrett asks if there was anyone from Soldier among the people they fought today. Cloud says, if there were, they wouldn't be standing here right now. Barrett is pissed off by Cloud's attitude and warns him not to think about siding with Shinra. Cloud insists he doesn't care about Shinra or Soldier or the planet or Avalanche. He heads upstairs where Tifa implores him to join Avalanche and help save the planet. Cloud says no and makes to leave, but Tifa reminds him of the promise he made 7 years ago. We see young Cloud and young Tifa meeting at the water tower in their home village of Nibelheim. Cloud tells Tifa that he plans on leaving for Midgar to join Soldier. He wants to be a great hero like Sephiroth. Tifa makes Cloud promise that if he becomes a famous hero and she's ever in trouble, that he'll come save her. She says she would like to be rescued by a hero at least once. Cloud promises. In the present, Cloud says he's neither a hero nor famous, so he can't keep the promise. Tifa's like, that's bullshit.
That's why when if someone makes a promise, you shouldn't make them make you a promise in like an if-then format. Like, you're just begging for them to find a way to get off the hook. That's really on her, really.
Barrett comes upstairs and gives Cloud his payment for the job. Cloud offers to stay for the next job if they increase his pay, and Tifa convinces Barrett to take the money out of Marlene's college fund. The next day, Barrett tells Cloud that their next target is Mako Reactor 5, and Tifa says she's coming along this time. Barrett admits he doesn't know how materia works, and asks Cloud to give him a tutorial. And this is a funny thing. Every Final Fantasy game, well, not every, but for the past few, I've had beginners halls where you go and you talk to a bunch of people and they each give you a tutorial. In this, you go to a beginners hall and Cloud is like, you all are scrubs. I know way more than you. So he teaches each individual person different things about the game.
It's really, really cute. I wouldn't say this game is a masterclass of, like, finding diegetically subversive ways to do gamey tropes. Like, that's not a thing I would generally say this game does constantly, but it does here, and it's very fun.
Anyway, so we have the materia tutorial, and materia are magic orbs that you put into your weapons or armor to give you magic powers. We'll learn much more about materia later in the game.
They also, I do think it's important to mention, are very, very, very explicitly not a gaming flabstraction.
Yes, they
are real things. They are constantly mentioned, and they're important to the plot, and will only become more important to the plot.
Yes. The Avalanche gang boards the train to head for Mako Reactor 5. Barrett clashes with a Shinra employee on the train and does a very bad job of not seeming like a terrorist. Barrett explains to Cloud that their fake IDs won't work at the checkpoint at the plate boundary, so they'll be jumping off this moving train. However, the gang's fake IDs are detected before the checkpoint, so they have to bail earlier than expected. The gang makes their way through the train tunnels into the center of Mako Reactor 5. When they get there, something comes over Cloud again, and he has a flashback. Tifa, who is wearing a cowboy hat, stands over the dead body of her father in what looks like another Mako reactor. She says Sephiroth must have killed him. She yells that she hates Sephiroth, Soldier, Mako reactors, Shinra, everything. She grabs a sword from the floor and runs deeper into the reactor. Back in the present, Barrett and Tifa are like, did you just have a flashback? And Cloud's like, no, and sets the bomb. This time, there's no timer on the escape. After a really annoying challenge, which stretches the definition of minigame, the gang arrives on the bridge outside the reactor.
This is first of many times that a completely UI-less minigame will just have you stuck.
Yep. And you know what? We talked earlier about this game's sort of bizarreness. Like, so much of it is so competent and confident and fresh and amazing, mostly in regards to its script and its pacing. But one of its other weird aspects is that the game is positively lousy with one-off mini games, none of which are fun, all of which are strange, and all of which makes you go, what was the point of that? Why could that not have just been a little cutscene? And the only explanation I can think of is the designers were just having a good time because there's this crazy new technology called the PlayStation 1. That's what they called it at the time, the PlayStation 1. And I don't know, they could, so they did, I guess, which honestly I can never fault people for that. Like, I love it when game creators are clearly just excited about the new technology and are doing shit with it, but it definitely is stupid as fuck.
Mhm.
I mean, there's something to be said too for the fact that that kind of weird, like a bunch of different little modes and such, was more common back then than now. Like even in, you'd play a first-person shooter, it would be like, okay, here's the vehicle section, here's the turret section, here's the weird thing where you need to like decide what order people go through a door or something. Like there would be a bunch of weird little things like that, and that's much less common now. I think people eventually figured out that doing one thing well is much better than doing a whole bunch of things poorly.
That is true, though.
I think it does, you're right, take it to an extreme, but there's a degree to which we're seeing an old design philosophy here, too.
I feel like what you're saying, though, is more analogous to things like the snowboarding minigame or the motorcycle minigame or
that's fair, that's true.
Like that, what you're saying is still very well taken, but what's really weird to me is not the mini games, but the like tiny little things that are, like bespoke interactions that show up for like 10 seconds. Right?
That's true. That is weird.
That's what weirds me out, and that's the thing that this game kind of does it pretty much exclusively.
Anyway, the Avalanche gang is immediately surrounded by Shinra soldiers. It was a trap. President Shinra, the president of Shinra, walks out of the reactor. He taunts Avalanche and realizes Cloud is the soldier who joined Avalanche because he has the glowing eyes of someone exposed to Mako. President Shinra says for him to remember Cloud, he'd have to be on Sephiroth's level. He muses that Sephiroth was a brilliant soldier, perhaps too brilliant. Barrett yells at President Shinra for a while and does not take the opportunity to assassinate him with his gun arm. President Shinra calls in a giant robot to kill the gang and makes his escape on a beautiful helicopter.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous little piece of 3D, low poly 3D graphics.
Yeah, in this game, you're used to all the 3D graphics just being like the character models. You're not used to having the low poly assets be things in the game because they're usually part of the background. So this helicopter stands out and is beautiful.
I will say, though, there are some robot enemies that you fight, and especially some of their designs are extremely fucking weird. Like, soon before this, I think you fight some of those robots with the weird, like, macaroni-shaped metal heads or something, I guess. I've never honestly been able to parse exactly what their deal is, except that they're bipedal robots with weird-ass metal heads. Like, yeah.
So after they defeat the robot, it explodes and destroys part of the bridge. Cloud is left dangling from the bridge, out of Barrett and Tifa's reach. Tifa tells him he can't die here. She still has so much to tell him. Cloud says to stop talking like this is the end. As Mako Reactor 5 explodes, Cloud falls to his certain death. According to Google, falls from a height of 30 meters are 100% fatal, and the plate is 50 meters up. Cloud is dead theory.
I want to start something here, which is, in games like this, you could say, well, this is insane and stupid. Like, why didn't they make even the most basic effort to give a good explanation for why he doesn't die? But you could just say, well, what if in this universe, humans can survive falls from heights? Because, I don't know, gravity is different, or human physiology is a little different. Like, FF10 explicitly, canonically is like, yeah, in this universe, humans can just hold their breath for like a really long time.
I was gonna say, yeah,
just deal with it.
Goes underwater all the time.
So I want us to all see if there's any other really fall from really high heights in this game. Because if it happens multiple times, we can just chalk it up to this just being normal in this world. But if it doesn't, I'm just curious about that.
I mean, if anything, you do have a couple instances where someone falling from a great height presumes they're dead later on, but I don't know. I always just figured it's because of the flowers. The sacred place he landed on. I don't know.
No, you see, as he was falling, he quickly turned into the size he is when he's on top of the church. So it was like a 5-foot drop for him. He just changed the camera angle so that his character model was bigger, so he saved himself.
I see.
And also, when you see the video, it's not like he's falling next to a wall where he could like try to grab onto things. Like, there's clearly nothing at all between him and the fucking ground. He's not falling through like girders or like, it's just, that's it.
But Cloud wakes up in a flower bed growing in a ruined church. The flower girl from before is there. She says he fell from the sky, but the roof and flower bed must have broken his fall.
Can I just say, too, sorry, super briefly, this arrangement of Aerith's theme that plays during this scene, I think it's just called Flowers Blooming in the Church, and it's possibly my favorite version of that theme over the actual theme. It's just very pretty. Anyway, I'm sorry, go on.
Well, I was gonna, I gotta say, because I was gonna mention this later, but you already mentioned it. So, there's two major themes in this game, Aerith's theme and the main theme of Final Fantasy VII. Both of those themes are foreshadowed with variations before they actually appear for real, and the Midgar section is where almost all the musical foreshadowing happens. So this is a variation of Aerith's theme that appears long before her actual theme shows up. And in just a little bit, we're going to hear the game's literal main theme appear, its overworld theme, which will also appear long before it appears for real. Really cute little thing that this game does.
Cloud is surprised by the flowers, but the flower girl says that even though plants don't usually grow in Midgar, these flowers seem to have no trouble here. The flower girl says they've met before. Unless you're an absolute freak, you tell her that you remember her. She asks Cloud if he has any materia. He's like, yeah, they're not that rare these days. She says she has some materia which her mother left her. It's special because it doesn't do anything. Even though it's useless, she feels safe wearing it. She finally introduces herself as Aerith. Well, she introduces herself as Eris, but we change it to Aerith because that's canon. Don't ask.
I cannot tell you how many comments I've gotten on my video on this game with people like legit. Some of them are very mad that I say Aerith instead of Eris. Like I've had people straight up say like, "Oh, disliked you used Aerith," and I'm like, "Come on."
Like, I don't care if you want to say Eris, but like if you want to say Eris, I don't actually care. It's actually a very pretty name. But like, we all know Aerith is just the thing. It's just what you do. It's like ducking before you jump to catch the wand in midair in Mario 3. It's just it's just the game as she is played. You know what
Honestly,
I mean?
Like the fact that they even bothered, if it wasn't important, they would have just localized her name as Eris and everything afterwards. But the fact that the moment anything aside from this game came out with her in it, like Kingdom Hearts or whatever, they changed it to Aerith. Like, you know, that's how it's meant to be.
Yeah. She has a tie to the earth, so it needs to look like the earth. She does not have a tie to the wind for it to look like arrow or whatever. She is earth.
She's also not an Harith of some kind. I know the H is silent, but if I didn't say the H, you wouldn't understand what word I was saying.
Yeah, make sure you have your subtitles on this podcast so you can get Maddie's jokes.
Cloud introduces himself and says he does a bit of everything. A mysterious man enters the church and Aerith asks Cloud if this everything he does includes being a bodyguard and if he can take her home. Cloud says yes, if she can pay. Aerith says she'll go on a date with him. Cloud seems to accept this. Cloud approaches the man and recognizes his uniform. Some Shinra soldiers enter and address the man as Reno. Cloud's about to kick this guy's ass, but Aerith says to follow her to the back exit so they don't ruin the flowers. Reno notes that Cloud had Mako eyes and follows. Cloud and Aerith head to the rafters of the church, but Aerith falls to the floor below. Another really annoying challenge is presented, in which Cloud must push barrels off the rafters to knock out the soldiers pursuing Aerith. Except there is no way to know where each barrel will go.
It's stupid as shit.
I mean, that's the thing is, like, as much as we were talking about how amazing the pre-rendered background stuff is, the fact that such a new and kind of pioneering thing was used in a puzzle, because you're supposed to basically, like, have a concept of what the ground, like, what the environment looks like so you can push a barrel down and it'll roll down at people or whatever. But aside from the fact that it doesn't let you actually look at, you know, the ground, you have to just remember it or whatever. The pre-rendered backgrounds aren't entirely clear for that sometimes, you know? Like, it's not a very good gameplay use of them.
As far as mood and tone and vibe and setting and theme and all that stuff, the free-rendered backgrounds are absolutely beautiful and phenomenal. As far as game design goes, they're, I think, across the board pretty terrible. Like, this game has a button that you can press that makes a little indicator appear anywhere there's an entrance or exit to your current screen.
What about that? Yeah.
You should not need a button to tell the player where the interactable shit in your game is. It should just be obvious from looking at it. But clearly they knew that that was not the case, so they had to fucking give you an extra little feature to help you out, because the environments are not... It's often not clear at all what the geometry of the space that you're currently in is. Like, what is ground you can run on and what isn't. It's a consistent problem throughout the game. It's very cute.
At least they had the decency to give us those indicators.
Yeah, no, I'm glad someone realized, like, hey, this game is really, really hard to play if we don't give the player a little bit of extra hint in navigation.
I also like the slightly meta bit in the tutorial hall or whatever, where, you know, a little finger shows up above Cloud. He looks up and he's like, what the hell? Finger? It always made me laugh.
Anyway, Cloud and Aerith escape to the roof of the church. Cloud says those guys were from the Turks, a Shinra group which scouts soldier candidates and also does work like espionage and assassinations. Cloud asks why they're after Aerith. She dodges the question and jokes that they must think she has what it takes to join Soldier. Cloud and Aerith hop along the rooftops. On the way, Aerith asks Cloud if he was in Soldier because of his eyes, and Cloud says, yeah, that's the mark of a soldier, one infused with Mako. But how do you know that? She again dodges the question. Cloud and Aerith make their way through the slums. They encounter a guy who are sick and had collapsed in town and only sits there and moans. Aerith notes that he has a tattoo of the number 2. Could this be a foreshadowing? Cloud and Aerith arrive at Aerith's house, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is supposed to be the slums, but this place is really nice.
One of the most beautiful pre-rendered backgrounds of the game, I think, honestly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's her wonderful modified 6.8 version of her theme is playing here as well.
Aerith introduces Cloud to her mom, Elmira. Aerith asks Cloud what he's going to do next, and he says he needs to go back to Sector 7 to Tifa's bar. Aerith like, is Tifa your girlfriend? Canon Cloud says no. Aerith offers to show Cloud the way through Sector 6 to Sector 7. Elmira tells him it's too late and they should go to bed and wait for tomorrow. Aerith heads upstairs to get a room ready for Cloud. Elmira asks Cloud if he was in Soldier. When he confirms that he was, she asks him to leave tonight without telling Aerith. She doesn't want Aerith getting mixed up with any more soldiers. Cloud heads to his room and dozes off. He dreams of visiting his mother in his hometown. His mother says she's worried about him living in the big city. She wants him to settle down with a nice girlfriend. Moms. Cloud wakes up and sneaks out of the house, which is another weird little interaction thing because you can accidentally wake up Aerith and she'll tell you to go back to bed. It's weird. On his way to Sector 6, he runs right into Aerith, who somehow got in front of him, and insists on coming along with him. They travel through one screen, which became a whole fucking dungeon with its own mechanics and everything in the remake.
Yeah, because I played this game in 2016 and I played remake 2 years ago, I couldn't tell where I was supposed to go because the pre-rendered backgrounds are bad, and I was like, I know it's something with this giant hand. It's obviously important. I remember it in the remake being a very big thing, but no.
Yeah, in the original, in the remake, it becomes an entire dungeon with its own special mechanics and like new characters that are named and are bosses, and these new characters are named and are bosses contain a song that is a remix of the Wall Market theme before you even get to the Wall Market. Although in the remake, they don't use the Wall Market song in Wall Market. They transposed it onto these characters instead. And yeah, no, it never happened. They made it up.
I absolutely love the remake. My only major complaint is the bullshit with the whispers, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, they padded. There are a few times where it's like, okay, you just like pulled some stuff out of your ass to elongate this.
Yeah, and some of it is some of it is lame and kind of tedious, and some of it is like the best parts of the game.
Yeah.
The dumb shit they made up to make the game longer.
Like we just talked about, the 3 seconds of cutscene where you hop from pre-rendered building to pre-rendered building is like 30 minutes of the best part of Final Fantasy VII remake. Is walking
And I
across
will
buildings.
say-
Get over Aerith saying shit. Never in
Yes.
my life. That's
And-
all of it.
And I will say, most of FF7 remakes extra padding, especially in this part, like why they made this into a whole dungeon, is so that you can have more interactions between Cloud and Aerith. Like that's why you need these characters to talk to each other and get to know each other, and for you to get to know them while you have a chance. Right? That's the whole. That's why they did that. So it's a smart move.
And it's done very well.
You need Aerith to teach Cloud what a high five is.
Anyway, they reach a park outside the gate to Sector 7. Aerith remembers this park from her childhood and asks Cloud to sit with her. She asks what rank he was in Soldier. After an ominous burst of static, which we will completely forget about before whatever it was portenting happens, he says he was in first class. Aerith says that's the same rank as the first guy she ever liked. Cloud asks his name since he might know him, but Aerith declines to answer. The gate opens and we see a crazy stagecoach being pulled by a chocobo. Cloud is shocked to see Tifa riding on it. Upon hearing that was Tifa, Aerith chases after the stagecoach. Cloud in turn chases after Aerith. They find themselves in a seedy district called Wall Market. Aerith warns Cloud that this is a dangerous place, especially for girls, so they need to find Tifa quickly. Cloud and Aerith ask around and find that Tifa has been taken to the mansion of Don Corneo, head honcho of Wall Market. She's going to audition to be Don Corneo's bride. The guard outside the mansion refuses to let Cloud in because the Don is not interested in men. Aerith says she'll go have a look, but Cloud says he can't let her go in alone. Aerith gets the idea to have Cloud dress as a woman so they can both enter. She tells the guard she'll bring her cute friend back. Cloud very reluctantly agrees to the plan. Cloud and Aerith go through a series of wacky misadventures to acquire various parts of Cloud's lady disguise, and it's great. Depending on your choices, you'll get different items. With the power of cross-dressing, Cloud and Aerith successfully gain entrance to the Dawn's mansion. As soon as they're left alone, they snoop around looking for Tifa. They find her in some sort of freaky torture chamber and/or sex dungeon. Aerith is like, "Hey, Tifa." Tifa's like, "Hey, how do you know my name? And who's that girl over there?" Tifa is shocked to see her friend who fell to his death alive and well and in a dress. Cloud asks Tifa what she's doing here. Aerith politely steps aside and plugs her ears so they can talk terrorism business. Tifa says that after Reactor 5, they noticed a weird guy snooping around and squeezed him for information. Don Corneo's name came up, so Tifa came here to do espionage. Every night, the Don lines up 3 women and chooses one to be his bride, which is her ticket to interrogating him, if she gets picked. Sam, I think I'm echoing on your thing.
Ben, did you die?
No, I didn't. I stupidly muted myself and then said, "Hey, I just muted myself. See if that's any better." I went to college.
We all did, apparently. And
but yeah, I'm gonna mute myself while you talk.
Aerith says she overheard after all, and that it's not a problem because they have 3 hot ladies right here. Cloud and Tifa are hesitant to get Aerith more involved, but she insists. A hired goon finds the girls and tells them that it's time to see the Don. They're led to his room and lined up in front of him. His character model is great. If he made all the right choices, Don Corneo chooses Cloud as his bride. We cut to Cloud and Don Corneo in a sex room. Cloud reveals he's a dude here to fuck up Don Corneo. The Don calls for his goons, but Tifa and Aerith burst in instead. They demand information from the Don, or else they'll do all sorts of terrible things to his balls. Don Corneo says that Heidegger, a higher-up at Shinra, told him to find the man with a gun for an arm. Under further pressure, he reveals that Shinra plans to destroy the support pillar holding up the Sector 7 plate and destroy Avalanche and their hideout in the Sector 7 slums. That's bad. The gang rushes to leave, but Don Corneo stops them and asks why they think he would reveal all this information when he probably likes having terrible things done to his balls anyway. However the gang answers, the Don pulls a secret lever and the floor opens. The gang falls through. Where do they end up? We'll find out next week. Technically, we pay a bit longer so that we can get to a safe point, but this feels like a better stopping point.
When we get down there, there's a boss and we kill it.
Yeah.
Is the boss actually really hard? I'm not playing the game again this time, but I remember it being really hard.
There's actually a whole other cutscene after this.
Oh, I thought the boss was like immediately upon landing in the sewer. All right.
It's a cutaway to secret dealings at Shinra Tower.
Right. Yeah. We'll do that next time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, let's listen to one more Final Fantasy VII song, and then we'll talk about our memorable moments for the week.
I'll start with one or two. I've got a million, but we'll not be sharing the millions of them. It's amazing how much fucking foreshadowing is in this section of the game. I always used to think of the Midgar section as like almost like a little self-contained story, and then the real plot of the game starts at the end of Midgar and also at the lengthy section in Calm. But they put so much foreshadowing, and I want to point some of it out because it was because Bernard was having to skip over a lot. First of all, also just world building, not just foreshadowing. I really like how early on that line of dialogue is like, "Yeah, Soldier's bad. ... He quit Shinra," and it's like a really clever way to be like, "Okay, Soldier, Shinra, these are the same thing, kind of, right?" I think Soldier should have still been in all caps. Personally, issue with the new translation. It's less clear that it's a weird thing than... Otherwise, the Italians are talking about a soldier. No, soldier is like some kind of weird organization. Is it dumb to put it in all caps? Yeah, but at least you know what's going on, right? Secondly, but here's some other stuff, though. Like, Tifa's very first words to Cloud, unless it was like, "Hi," is like, "Did you argue with Barrett?" Like, immediately establishes her as mom friend, right? Like, she's your sweet mom friend who's worried about you, which is definitely why it's not canon that she becomes your girlfriend, because if you have a sweet mom friend who cares for you, you should not try and date her. Okay? Many such cases, it doesn't work out. It's a totally different dynamic. Okay?
In all fairness, that is exactly what his mom said he should have. So
true, but it's just not the same thing. It's just not the same thing. But anyway, other thing though, just as another example, darn it, where is it? Oh yeah, all the subtle stuff about Aerith's boyfriend. I really like how right at the very beginning, Cloud says something, and Aerith like does a little giggle, and he's like, "Why do you giggle?" And she's like, "Don't worry about it." And I'm like, "Oh, she's giggling because Cloud reminds her of her boyfriend, right?" Which is very, very important. You'll find out later. And then a little while later, when you go into the room with Elmira, who is great, by the way, Elmira's like, "So you're a soldier, huh?" Cloud's like, "Yeah." And after you say that, she's like, "You need to leave without Aerith." Like, and again, saying, "I don't want my fucking daughter hanging out with soldiers again like she did last time. It didn't go well for her last time," right? And then also, in the translation that we're currently playing, her line about her ex-boyfriend, or ex-guy, Cloud's like, "So were y'all dating?" And she goes, "It wasn't like that. I just thought he was kind of nice." Which, that's just very subtle writing. It's hard to know how to interpret it. Is that her way of saying she was super in love with him? Or is it really, this is just some guy that she kind of liked, that she has fond memories of? It's it's so open to interpretation that it makes her very mysterious. And yes, it is tied to one of the game's biggest mysteries. So lots of really nice little dialogue going on in this game early on.
Yes, Tim Rogers's series Let's Mosey, a slow translation of Final Fantasy VII, goes into detail about how in the original translation of Final Fantasy VII, she just calls him her boyfriend or whatever. But in the original version, it's much more like vague and mysterious what their relationship was.
Well, I forgot that memorable moments was like the thing that we do on this podcast. So I muted myself and I've been sort of like typing up things for my notes to mention, and there's a lot of them. So I'll try and be short about them. There were a lot of just small things that I noticed as I was playing through this time. One of them is that as you are leaving Seventh Heaven to go to the reactor number 5, there's a bit where Tifa's like, Marlene, watch the barge. He's like, okay. But that whole scene, you can see Marlene in the background, like, taking stuff and either actually mixing drinks or pretending to. Like, she's shaking stuff and you hear the little, like, the ice shaking in it or whatever. And it's just really cute. I love Marlene. Also, just the characterization of Barrett and her in general. There is a conversation that has been going for a long time about Barrett's portrayal in relation to his race and the stereotypes employed, especially in the English translation. And that is absolutely that's a conversation that should be had, and there's a lot to say on it. Mm-hmm. But that's also often, I think, been simplified to a much more reductive Barrett is just a black stereotype, which I don't think is accurate at all. Again, those stereotypical elements are there and should be talked about, but the character himself, like, I think a lot of people think of him as just this big aggressive guy. He's a fucking dork. Like, I love Barrett a lot.
He's a great character.
I love Barrett.
Like, he plays it being tough, but you see as soon as he gets in with Marlene what a teddy bear he is. And he's also, like, he's one of those people, I kind of relate to him, honestly, because, like, he gets riled up when he's passionate about something. Like, a lot of the early exposition of the game is functionally the same as explaining a bunch of, because he's just like telling Cloud how Mako reactors work. Cloud even, I think, says, like, I used to work for Shinra, I know what this stuff is. But he can't stop himself from just ranting about it and providing exposition because he cares about it so much, and it's amazing. I love him a lot. So yeah, Barrett's great.
I love the thing that happens multiple times this week where Barrett just gets pissed off at Cloud's cool guy attitude. Mm-hmm. I find it really
also
funny.
In the train, he very clearly is pissed off that Cloud made him worry. And it's like, dude, this is a mercenary that you hired. He's literally just a hired gun, and you're already like really, really worried that something happened to him. And then it turns out he didn't, and you're mad at him for sort of, jerking you around, and it's like, he's such a fucking softie. It's adorable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also want to highlight, because if you haven't played this game since 1997 and you've played Kingdom Hearts and watched Advent Children, you might have forgotten that Cloud is trying to be a badass and is not actually an aloof badass. And it is a very subtle distinction, but Cloud should not be taken seriously for all of the emo boy outwardness that he's doing. He says, "Let's mosey," for fuck's sake. So
I was so surprised when Final Fantasy VII Remake totally nailed Cloud's characterization as someone who is cool, but not nearly as cool as he's trying to be.
Well, or I would say in a different way, he's not remotely cool at all in the way he's trying to be, but he actually is cool in a different way that he doesn't realize and doesn't need to be putting up a front. And that's why everyone likes him. Everyone immediately likes Cloud, but it's not because of the false image he projects. It's because of his true self underneath that image that is very, very transparently obvious to anyone who sees him. Like, he's not fooling anybody. They don't like the fake Cloud. They like the real Cloud. He just doesn't realize they like the real Cloud. And that's true here, too, not just in the remake. That is very, very clear here, too. Like, yeah, Barrett's a weirdo and a softie, but it is true that every character so far who's met Cloud has immediately taken a shine to him.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying really makes sense, because I think Aerith finds Cloud's projecting a different manner of coolness, like really cute and funny. That's why she's always laughing at him.
Yeah, she's laughing at how ridiculous he is, but she's okay with it because she just sees it as a funny quirk of a guy that's actually pretty cool.
For that matter, we can't get too far into it because spoilers, but there's a whole other element of Tifa and Cloud's dynamic, Tifa to Cloud in particular, that is just,
Anywho, anyone have any other memorable moments before we wrap up?
I've still got more. So,
go for it.
Let's see. We've mentioned the static briefly, and it's amazing how right you are that, like, I completely forget that happens every time. Like, every time I replay the game, I'm like, oh, I forgot about this. And it's amazing, like, weirdly subtle foreshadowing that somehow just completely leaves my mind once I'm done playing it. But as I'm replaying it, I'm like, oh, shit, that's important. That's interesting. The little bit where Aerith's mom said the Cloud had to leave is something that hit me a lot. Just like, there's so much history that hints at. It's like you were talking about, great sort of setup and foreshadowing and such there. The cross-dressing scene, I feel like we have to talk about the cross-dressing thing in more detail, right? Like, it's a classic scene. It's very interesting because there are some elements of it, particularly in the Honeybee Inn, that are capital P problematic, I suppose. But the overall tone of it is so interesting. Like, you'd expect that it would be this whole weird thing where it's all like, dude has to dress up like a girl, isn't that funny? But instead, like, all of the humor comes from Cloud's obvious discomfort with it, rather than from, like, the very concept of, like, cross-dressing. It was really interesting to me replaying it and thinking, this isn't nearly as offensive as I'd expected it to be in 1997.
No, it kind of rules. Like, and again, like, the reason why Cloud doesn't want to dress up as a woman isn't because it's so horrible for a man as a woman. It's because he's trying to project a fake cool guy attitude. And obviously, that's the opposite of what you should be doing. And, like, no one thinks what he's doing is ridiculous. And he doesn't even put it that much of a fight. He's like, I'd rather not. And then Aerith is like, you have to. And he's like, okay. Right? It just kind of happens. And I don't even have that much to say. I'm sure there's been like fucking academic papers of fucking discourse about this part. But as a tran, I'm like, nah, I just kind of think it rules. I think it's hilarious. And there's so much that I think it's so obviously good natured, and what's going on is so obvious that it pretty much just nails whatever it's going for, which is just being goofy and fun.
Yeah,
and like as a queer man, I feel the representations of queer characters in the Honeybee Inn and in the gym, like, there's problems the with them.
That's called men in kanji right above the door.
Yes. A lot of it rings true to me. It feels like it was written by someone who has some amount of experience with gay people, but it was still the 90s, so it's not perfect, but I don't know.
Yeah, I read when I was, because, I'm a straight cis guy, so when I was making my video, I read up on and, like, talked to non-straight cis people, just to make sure that I had that perspective going into it. And I was kind of pleasantly surprised to see how many people brought up specifically the fact that, as a general rule, when people find out that Cloud wants to dress up like a girl, like, especially the bit where Aerith just, like, takes the dressmaker aside and is like, he's just always wanted to look pretty. And he's like, what are you saying about me? Like, there's not really a point where anyone's like, really? They're like, what a pervert. Okay, whatever. They're just kind of like, oh, okay, sure, cool. Like,
I can make that happen for you.
They just kind of go with it. It's kind of treated as like a creative reawakening for the clothing maker guy. Like, and just that seemed to hit a lot of people, especially, people who were in the process of or hadn't quite realized things about themselves. And I just think it's cool that the game is more accepting of that than I would have expected.
I just think it's neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And wow, did this scene really take off in the remake?
Yeah. I was
boy.
I love it so much.
It's amazing.
I was going to bring up the remake scene when we were talking about how they nailed Cloud's personality in the remake, because he wants everyone to think he's this badass, and then he gets on stage in a dress and he twirls and he snaps and he smirks while he does it.
Yeah,
and that's Cloud.
They actually make pretty clear that while he would rather not be dressing as a girl, he is, once he realizes he has to, he's like kind of committed to being like as hot as possible.
Yep.
He's like, look, if I'm gonna be a girl, I at least got to be a pretty one. I actually read an article. And again, I think that discoursing about queer representation in media is mostly just a stupid waste of time, kind of. But I also did read this article that made a pretty interesting point, which was that the remix version of the Honeybee Inn and Wall Market was, especially the Honeybee, is like kind of worse. Because instead of just being weird and goofy, it's like very like sanitized, like Queer Eye shit.
Mhm.
And honestly, I fully agree with that. I loved that scene, but it also is like, oh, they turned, like, they took like something that felt like just kind of weirdly, just weird queer media and turned it into RuPaul's Drag Race. Like, that's kind of how it felt to me.
That's fair. I could see stuff like this is always tough because they obviously couldn't do like the scene in the original version in the Honeybee Inn where it like maybe implies a bunch of dudes gangbang Cloud. Like, you know, they had to do some
they were
things
kind of
to change it,
in a sticky place for
Yeah.
sure, but it's just like, like, I don't know. In the original game, you just kind of go around and weird stuff happens, and then in the remake, it's like, and then Cloud goes and, you know, twerks, and it's serving real looks up on the stage while the plays. And it makes me think of like how many queer spaces. God, I can't believe I use the phrase queer spaces. Kill me. How many queer spaces in the modern era have been just extremely gentrified or just don't exist anymore and are always, again, like sort of sanitized, right? And a big part of it, like, it's good that like gay bars aren't like illegal anymore. Please don't raid them and fucking shoot people and shit. But on the other hand, it has pretty much been subsumed under like the monoculture and capital and stuff. It's this stuff is all endlessly complicated, but it is I actually really thought that article made some interesting points, which one of the things where I didn't think about that while I was playing it, but when I read the article I was like, oh, you know, this is obviously correct, even though I didn't think about it until I read this article.
So I think this is the first time we've had an Operation Babe Hunt monologue begrudgingly pulled from Maddie Grace. We weren't vehemently like, oh, now we have to talk about Operation Babe Hunt. Now we have to talk about the second case of Danganronpa. Now it's like, I guess I'll say the words queer spaces on my podcast.
I can't believe I'm you know what, I'm done. I'm gonna leave.
Well, here, I'll save you from it with my last memorable moment, which is a specific quote. There is, I assume, in the end, going to be a lot for us to talk about regarding this game's politics, because there is, frankly, a lot to say regarding this game's politics. And it's one of the more famously, you know, people being like, oh, get your politics out of my Final Fantasy VII, despite it being an extremely explicitly political game. But, like in Metal Gear Solid, I feel like are the two most baffling. Like, did you not read any of the dialogue? But anyway, there's a lot here about environmentalism and capitalism, all sorts of things like that. But there's a particular line that stood out to me a whole lot. It's when Jessie is showing Cloud the map of Midgar and explaining how Midgar works. And she says, each town used to have a name, but no one in Midgar remembers them. Instead of names, we refer to them by numbered sectors. That's how things turned out.
That's a good line.
This whole feeling of a place that used to actually be a community being taken over by this giant corporation and reduced to numbers. Like, the Midgar section just thrums with that vibe in general. It's so effectively communicated with the visuals and what we know of the history and such. But that line in particular just stood out to me among a lot of lines about that as a particularly kind of powerful example of what that looks like in this case. And I just thought it was great.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Jesse, which reminds me, whenever the Final Fantasy remake trilogy is completed, we're going to do it for Longcast so that we can talk about Jessie, because she's not a character in this game, but she's the best character in remake.
Also, I feel bad that Wedge did not make his way into my notes at all, because he never has an important line. There's some fun characterization with him, but he never has a plot important line like Biggs and Jesse kind of do.
Yeah.
I will say Jesse features heavily in my polyamory chart, which will, of course, make a reappearance in this, but not. I mean,
it has to.
We can talk about our memorable moments first.
Yes. But I think that's all that I got. Anything else anyone has to say before we wrap it up?
I just love Aerith so much, and I feel like if you just go into the original translation cold, then you won't get why she's so great. But if you have at some point watched Tim Rogers' Let's Mosey series, or you've played Final Fantasy VII Remake, you will fully understand the characterization that was there in the original Final Fantasy VII, and it shines through when you know it's there, and it's amazing. She is hilarious.
It's still there a little bit, but only a little bit. And I think that one line that really gives her away, like if you are fresh to this game and want to know what we're talking about, the line to focus on is the line when, like, she's like, hey, can you escort me home? These goons are after me. And Cloud's like, I'm a mercenary, I don't work for free. And she's like, how about I go on a date with you? Like, that's such a fucking funny thing to say. And also is like, you know, like exchanging a date for money or maybe sex for money. Like, that's a very edgy thing to do. Your average person doesn't generally do that, right? If you do that, it's either because, well, you're either forced to do it by poverty, or you're a smaller subset of people who really gets a lot of, enjoyment out of that sort of thing. But it's definitely not something your average Joe does. So the fact that she just immediately jumps to that is really, really, really telling. And she's constantly doing shit like that, being like weirdly aggressive, weirdly edgy, weirdly bold.
She's tough.
Great. She's tough. And also, like, kind of chaotic, and also, like, very... There's some other adjective that I can't quite think of that is really more astute than the words we've said so far, but maybe we'll figure it out by next week.
In general... there's such an interesting thing going on because of the translation that we've talked about, where, like, when it comes down to it, I can see how if someone's not paying attention, they could come away thinking Cloud is an edgy edgelord and Barrett is an aggressive dude, and Aerith is just some, like, little flower of a girl or whatever. But, like, they're not, and that is present in the in the dialogue. You can tell it, but you do have to be paying attention because the translation is not all that great. Like, it's there, it's just not as obvious as it should be, which is why as we've hinted at a little bit, I was shocked and amazed at how well Remake captured exactly who these characters are, because so many people did not notice it.
Yeah, a lot of people, played this when they were young, and also played this a long time ago and then misremembered things. And then those misrememberations became sort of canon in things like Advent Children.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, I will say, to give you a little more credit than that, also, frankly, this game's just a lot more complex and rich in its characterization. It's a lot more literary and mature than FF, for example, 6, the previous game in the series. So, if you play this and you're a teen, you also just might not get it. Like not because of translation or anything, you might just, like, not have enough maturity to really understand what's going on, which is very cool, right? It's cool that it has that level of sophistication. I have one last bit of memos that I want to bring up. I'm not going to get into this game's politics, though there is a lot of really interesting stuff to say here, but I will say Barrett makes so much more sense once you realize that he's an organizer. Like, he's I said he has organizer brain, but he's not very good at it, and it's really cute. Like, when he makes small talk about how the planets die in Cloud in the elevator, he's not just talking, and he's also not just ranting because he's passionate. He's giving Cloud a recruitment speech.
Mm-hmm.
That is very obviously what he's doing. He's giving him the sell. He's giving him the hard ask. And he's not very good at it. But he's trying. Also, he makes Cloud set the bomb, which is, again, that's organizer brain. Don't do something when you can make the new guy do it. And, watch him and tell him how to do it. Make the new guy do it so you can train them up with new skills and also make them feel like they're a part of things, generate buy-in, right? I joke that he's trying to get Cloud's very clearly a 3 or a 4, depending on what skill you're using. A 3 means someone who's completely unengaged. They're not against what you're doing, but they're just totally ambivalent. Whereas a 1 is what you would call like cadre, someone who's like your leaders, your main doers. He's trying to get someone who just does not care and immediately get them on his level, which you can't do. But he's trying to, and it's very funny. And then also like, when where is the other? There's one more thing about Barrett I wanted to mention that's very similar. On the train, maybe. Damn, I don't know where Barrett's other line is. Whatever. There's one more thing, which is that pretty much nobody appeals to Cloud's self-interest. They all keep trying to use this emotional appeal to like his selfless morality, like. Don't you want to save the planet? Don't you care about saving the planet? And it's like, no, that's not going to work. Why would Cloud care about saving the planet? He doesn't give a shit. That's not a good pitch. In organizing, you have these. In one kind of organizing is that you have this thing called selfishness, which is first you have selflessness, which is don't you want to be a good person? Don't you want to save the poor, whatever kind of person you're trying to save that you're not one of, right? And that's okay, but it's not reliable. You can't rely on someone being a good person. Like, yeah, maybe I care about the poor, the plight of the queers, even though I'm like a, cis-het man. But as soon as the going gets tough and my life gets busy or hard or I get uncomfortable, I'm going to bail, right? You can't rely on that sort of selfless goodwill. Then there's selfishness, which is when you only care about yourself. And that's not good either, because why would you do anything besides just go to work and make money and go home, right? But then there's this thing in the middle called self-interest, which is not the same as selfishness. Self-interest is understanding that your interests are in fact connected with other people's interests, right? Whether it's class interest, whether it's identitarian interest, whether it's whatever. And basically, the reason I explained all of that is that every time someone tries to appeal to Cloud, they're either using the appealing to his selflessness or his selfishness, and neither of those actually work. Now, Cloud does end up helping them, right? Yeah, but you know why he ends up helping them? He ends up helping them because because his nice friend asked him to, which is something that only works on Cloud. And also, it's like, hey, Cloud, you're clearly in a rough place, have no money. I'm your only friend in the entire world. You have basically nowhere else to go and no one else who loves you, so you'd better join this group. Which made me write, do you want a weird Black Hammer-esque cult? Because that's how you get a fucked up Black Hammer-esque cult. Yeah, it rules, and once I realized that about Barrett, though, it just, like, clicked. I'm like, no, every single thing Barrett's doing here is just extremely good. And you see this with everyone. That random guy on the train, like every character, he's just like, why don't you care about this as much as I do? It's like, Barrett, you can't just get people to care about things immediately. You gotta develop some better strategies here.
My favorite moment for that was definitely when Barrett was like, the planet's dying, and Cloud was like, not my problem. And I when I first played, I was like, of course it's your problem. What are you talking about? That's a stupid thing to say. And now, of course, as an adult seeing the world around me, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. That's apparently an actual thing.
Yeah, like, no, like, it's not your problem until someone convinces you, until someone makes it your problem. And that's their job, man.
All right, I think we could talk about Final Fantasy VII all night.
Yeah, no, I'm done. I've got 50 more things that I explicitly wrote as I'm not saying this.
I'm sure there'll be a lot that we can only really get to when we get through more of the story anyway. So,
Yeah, there will be time. If you liked what you heard today and you want to help us offset the costs of running the show, head on over to www.rpgbook.club, where any and all donations are put back into the show to make it better, offset hosting costs, bias games, those sorts of things. If you donate $1 or more a month, you'll get access to our Book Club no Kiseki episodes a month before everyone else, as well as be able to vote on our polls to decide what game or who we play next. Like we said earlier, there's a poll live the entire time we're playing Final Fantasy VII, covering Bernard's Auto by RPGs, Skies of Arcadia, and Paper Mario. So head on over to www.rpgbook.club to donate and place your votes. If you bump up your monthly contribution to $5 or more a month, you also get your name shouted out at the end of every episode. So shout outs to Bernie L. Taylor, AA Ron 524, Anthony Lerma, Vimk, Jfro Prime, and Doho. And if you then bump your monthly donation up to $20 a month, we will not only read your name, but give you a 1-sentence shout out to whatever you want. The idea is for this to be a URL for your Twitch stream or your YouTube channel, or just to make me say something stupid. We now have 2 luminaries. Eliza Tantavi is our new luminary. Thank you so much. And they want you to know about, they're literally Discording it to me right now, because I had in my notes that I said they want you to know that coming up with a shout out is hard and they're still working on it. But literally right now at the second, they are sending me a message on Discord saying they thought of one. They said they're shouting out IFComp, which is at ifcomp.org. It says that they have a week left for anyone who wants to join as a judge. You just have to play 5 of the submissions and rate them. I don't know what the submissions are. It is the interactive fiction competition. So you go play 5 interactive fictions, be a judge for it. That's at ifcomp.org.
Interactive fiction is, like Zork. It's like that, but they still do them today, and they're much more complicated and sophisticated than they were when they called it when they were Zork. But that's what it is.
Yes. Our other current luminary, Carr, is a dentist, so his shout out is not for his Twitch stream, but for your own mouth. He asks you to brush your teeth twice a day. Most importantly, the time right before you go to bed. For RPG Book Club, I have been Sam Allman.
I'm David Bernard Hauk.
I'm Maddie Grace Webben.
And I'm the Game Prof.
Toodaloo, folks.
Goodbye, people.
Did y'all know that Yasunori Mitsuda composed the music for Mario Party?
Sure did. It's a strange fact. That game's music, you'd think, oh, it's actually really good. Nah, it's mid. It's fine.
Honestly, Mitsuda, I don't know. The Chrono Trigger soundtrack is one of my it was my favorite game soundtrack until the Nier games, but I have not heard another Mitsuda soundtrack that stands out to me much at all. It's weird.
I think all of this stuff is like absolute god tier. I think he's fantastic. But not a good pick for Mario Party.
No.
Yeah, that's some Yoko Shimomura shit.
Yeah.